The rain hit the studio windows so hard that night it sounded like the glass might shatter at any second. But the moment Jungkook whispered, "I feel safest when I'm with you," Jimin forgot every sound in the world except his voice. The practice room smelled faintly of sweat, cold coffee, and the sharp scent of wet pavement drifting in through the cracked window. Neon lights from the city bled through the rain-streaked glass, painting the wooden floor in trembling shades of blue and silver. Jimin stood frozen near the mirror, his breathing uneven after hours of rehearsal, while Jungkook sat on the floor with his back against the wall, head lowered, fingers trembling around a water bottle he hadn't opened. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jimin thought he had imagined the confession. But then Jungkook looked up. His eyes were red, not from exhaustion, from holding something in for far too long. "You always do this," Jimin said softly, trying to smile even though tension coiled inside his chest. "You suddenly say dangerous things like they mean nothing." Jungkook laughed once bitterly. "Dangerous, you know what I mean." Younger man leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. The overhead lights flickered faintly above him, casting shadows beneath his jawline. He looked exhausted in a way cameras never captured. Not physically, emotionally. Jimin had known Jungkook for years. He knew the difference. There were countless versions of Jungkook the world adored. The golden performer on stage, the playful youngest member during interviews, the perfectionist in the recording booth, the athlete, the dreamer, the star. But this version was different, quiet, fragile, and terrifyingly honest. "You ever get tired?" Jungkook asked suddenly. Jimin frowned. "Tired of what?" "Pretending you're okay because everyone needs you to be." The room fell silent except for the rain. Jimin hated questions like that because Jungkook only asked them when he himself was drowning. Slowly, Jimin crossed the room and sat beside him. Their shoulders brushed lightly. Warmth spread through the thin fabric of his hoodie immediately, but Jungkook didn't pull away. That alone said everything. "You don't have to pretend with me," Jimin murmured. Jungkook stared ahead at their reflections in the mirror. "That's the problem. You make it too easy." Jimin's heartbeat stumbled. Outside, thunder rolled across the city skyline. Jungkook exhaled shakily and rubbed both hands over his face before speaking again. "Everyone thinks I can handle everything, even the members sometimes." His voice cracked slightly. "But lately, I don't know anymore." Listened quietly. He knew this side of fame too well, the pressure, the fear of disappointing millions, the loneliness that somehow became heavier in crowded stadiums. But Jungkook carried it differently. He buried it deep until it poisoned him from the inside. "When was the last time you slept properly?" Jimin asked. Jungkook smiled weakly. 3 days ago, that's not funny." "I know." Turned toward him fully now, concern sharpening in his eyes. Up close, Jungkook looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights. There were faint dark circles under his eyes, hidden carefully with makeup during schedules. His lips were dry, his hands restless. Something was wrong, not suddenly, gradually. Like cracks spreading through glass before anyone notices it's about to break. "You should have told me earlier," Jimin whispered. Jungkook finally looked at him then, and the vulnerability in his gaze hit harder than any scream. "I wanted to." The confession settled between them like fire. Jimin felt his chest tighten painfully. "Then why didn't?" "Every time I'm around you," Jungkook hesitated, jaw clenching, "I stopped knowing how to hide things." The rain intensified outside. Jimin swallowed hard. There had always been something dangerous about the way Jungkook looked at him during quiet moments. Not on stage, not for cameras, but in ordinary seconds nobody else noticed. In cars after schedules, during late-night meals, in exhausted silences after concerts. Jimin had spent years pretending not to see it, because acknowledging it meant risking everything, their friendship, their balance, the fragile world they lived in. But tonight felt different. Tonight Jungkook looked like someone standing at the edge of collapse, and Jimin couldn't ignore that. "You're scaring me," Jimin admitted softly. Jungkook laughed under his breath, though tears gathered helplessly in his eyes. "I scare myself these days." Honesty in that sentence sliced straight through him. Without thinking, Jimin reached for Jungkook's hand. The younger man froze instantly. His fingers were cold. For several seconds neither of them moved. Then Jungkook slowly tightened his grip, not casually, desperately. As if he had been waiting for permission to fall apart. Jimin's throat tightened. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he said quietly. Jungkook looked down at their intertwined hands and whispered, "I know." He sounded like someone who still didn't believe it. The practice room suddenly felt too small for all the emotions trapped inside it. Jimin remembered the first time he met Jungkook years ago, shy eyes, oversized hoodie, endless determination. Back then, Jungkook chased perfection like survival depended on it. Maybe it still did. That was the cruelest part. The world loved Jungkook most when he looked invincible. Nobody noticed how much it cost him, except Jimin always noticed, always, even when he tried not to. "Talk to me," Jimin said gently. Jungkook stayed silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice barely rose above the rain. "Sometimes I feel like people only love the version of me that never breaks." Jimin's chest ached instantly. "That's not true. You sure?" "Yes," turned toward him slowly, eyes glistening. "Then why am I terrified of disappointing everyone all the time?" Jimin didn't answer immediately because he understood that fear too deeply. Instead, he squeezed Jungkook's hand tighter. "You know what I think?" he asked softly. "What?" "I think you forgot you're human." Jungkook blinked, and suddenly tears slipped down his face before he could stop them. Jimin's breath caught. Jungkook rarely cried in front of others anymore. He had trained himself out of it, hidden it behind smiles and jokes and professionalism. But tonight the mask finally cracked. "I'm tired, Jimin," he whispered brokenly. The words shattered something inside the older man. Without hesitation, Jimin pulled him closer. Jungkook resisted for barely half a second before collapsing into him completely. His shoulders shook violently. Jimin wrapped both arms around him instinctively, holding him steady while thunder echoed outside the building. Jungkook buried his face against his shoulder, breaths uneven and fragile. And suddenly Jimin understood. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was loneliness. The kind that grows silently even when surrounded by millions of people. Jimin closed his eyes tightly. "You idiot," he whispered shakily, holding him closer. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Jungkook's voice trembled against his shoulder. "If I started depending on you," he swallowed hard, "I don't think I'd ever stop." The confession hit harder than anything before it. Jimin felt his heartbeat spiral out of control. For a terrifying moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside continued moving, rain, thunder, distant traffic, flashing city lights. But inside the practice room, everything narrowed down to warmth, trembling breaths, and the unbearable truth between them. Jimin slowly pulled back just enough to look at him. Jungkook's eyes were swollen from crying now, but somehow he still looked unbearably beautiful beneath the cold lights, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. "You can depend on me," Jimin said quietly. Jungkook stared at him like he couldn't believe those words were real. "You mean that? With everything I have?" Then Jungkook smiled, small, fragile, real, and somehow that expression hurt Jimin more than the tears, because it revealed how long Jungkook had gone without hearing something he truly believed. The rain outside finally began to soften. Inside the studio, Jungkook leaned against him again, quieter this time, calmer. Neither of them noticed the forgotten phones buzzing endlessly nearby. Neither realized headlines were already spreading online about sudden schedule cancellations and worried fans. Neither understood that this night, this fragile, honest moment would quietly change everything between them forever. All Jimin knew was that Jungkook's heartbeat had finally started slowing against his chest. And for the first time in weeks, Jungkook looked like someone who could finally breathe again. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in pale gray light and the lingering scent of rain. Jimin woke first. For several seconds he stayed completely still, disoriented by the unfamiliar warmth against him. Then memory returned all at once, the practice room, Jungkook crying in his arms, the confession that still echoed painfully inside his chest. "I feel safest when I'm with you." Jimin lowered his gaze. Jungkook was asleep beside him on the studio couch, head resting against Jimin's shoulder, one hand still loosely gripping the fabric of his hoodie as if afraid he might disappear. His breathing was finally steady, peaceful, and somehow that terrified Jimin more than last night's tears, because Jungkook trusted him enough to fall asleep like this. Outside the tall windows, Seoul slowly awakened beneath cloudy skies. Cars moved through wet streets reflecting soft morning lights. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly before fading away. Inside the practice room, silence remained gentle. Jimin carefully studied Jungkook's face. Without makeup, without cameras, without that polished smile the world loved so much, Jungkook looked younger, softer. Exhausted in ways nobody should be at his age. There was still faint redness around his eyes. Jimin's chest tightened again. How long had he been suffering quietly, and why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? A sudden vibration shattered the silence. Jimin glanced toward the floor. 2 phones lit up endlessly near the mirror. Missed calls, messages. Notifications piling up faster every second. Manager Hyung. Namjoon, Taehyung, even Bang Si-hyuk. Jimin immediately knew something was wrong. Carefully, he reached for his phone without waking Jungkook. The screen exploded with headlines the moment it unlocked. Jungkook's sudden schedule cancellation sparks concern. Notice BTS Maknae appearing unwell. Trending "Are you okay Jungkook worldwide?" Jimin's stomach dropped. A blurry photo from yesterday evening filled the screen. Jungkook entering the company building with his hood pulled low, exhaustion painfully visible even through the grainy image. Thousands of comments flooded underneath. He looks sick. He hasn't smiled properly lately. Please let him rest. Looked back at the sleeping man beside him. Even now Jungkook's brows twitched faintly in his sleep, like his mind refused to rest completely. The pressure never stopped, not even for one night. Jimin quietly locked the phone and exhaled slowly. Then Jungkook stirred. His grip tightened instinctively on Jimin's sleeve before his eyes opened halfway, clouded with sleep and confusion. For one vulnerable second he looked scared, until he recognized who was beside him. Then his expression softened immediately. "You stayed," Jungkook whispered hoarsely. Jimin tried to ignore the dangerous warmth spreading through his chest at those words. "Of course I stayed." Jungkook blinked slowly, still waking up. "What time is it?" "Too early." A tired laugh escaped him. It was small but genuine. Jimin realized then how much he had missed hearing Jungkook laugh naturally instead of forcing it for cameras. The younger man rubbed his eyes before suddenly freezing. He noticed how close they still were, not just physically, emotionally. The memory of last night clearly hit him all at once because his ears immediately turned red. Jimin pretended not to notice. Mostly because his own heartbeat was already becoming impossible to control. "You should sleep more," Jimin said softly. "I probably should." But Jungkook looked away toward the rain-covered windows. "If I go home now, everyone's gonna ask questions." Exhaustion in his voice made Jimin's chest ache again. "Then don't go yet." Jungkook turned back toward him slowly. Here for a while, silence stretched between them, then Jungkook smiled faintly. "You make things sound simple. They should be simple." "They aren't for us." The words hung heavily in the air. Because they were true, nothing about their lives was simple anymore. Not friendship, not comfort, not feelings Jimin was trying desperately not to examine too closely. A sharp knock suddenly echoed outside the practice room door. Both of them froze. Another knock followed immediately. "Jungkook, Jimin, Namjoon." Jungkook sat upright instantly, panic flashing across his face. Jimin reacted just as quickly, standing before the older member could open the door himself. When Jimin finally pulled it open, Namjoon stood there holding 2 iced coffees and looking profoundly exhausted. But the moment he saw Jungkook sitting on the couch behind him, relief crossed his expression so visibly it hurt to witness. "There you are," Namjoon breathed. Jungkook looked guilty immediately. "Sorry, don't apologize." Namjoon stepped inside quietly, eyes scanning Jungkook carefully like he was checking for invisible injuries. "You scared everyone." Younger man lowered his gaze, and Jimin suddenly realized something. Jungkook wasn't only carrying pressure from fans. He was carrying guilt too, for worrying people, for being tired, for struggling at all. Namjoon seemed to notice the same thing because his voice softened instantly. He said gently, "You don't have to look like that." Jungkook forced a weak smile. "Like what?" "Like you're about to apologize for existing." The room fell silent. Jimin saw Jungkook's composure crack slightly again. Namjoon sighed quietly before setting the coffees down. "We're worried about you," he admitted. "Not because you miss schedules, because you've been disappearing even when you're standing right beside us." Jungkook didn't answer. Outside, rainwater slid slowly down the glass windows. Finally, Namjoon spoke again. "Come eat breakfast with us." Jungkook hesitated. "I'm not really hungry." That wasn't a request. A tiny smile appeared on Jimin's lips. Leader mode. Even Jungkook laughed softly under his breath at that. But despite the lighter atmosphere, tension still lingered beneath everything, unspoken, fragile. Namjoon's eyes shifted briefly between the two of them, then paused. Something unreadable crossed his expression. Not suspicion exactly, more like realization. Jimin felt heat crawl up his neck instantly. Because maybe the way Jungkook looked at him had changed too much last night. Maybe it was obvious now. Jungkook seemed to sense the shift too, because he quickly stood up and grabbed his jacket. "I'll wash up first," he muttered before disappearing toward the hallway bathroom. The moment the door closed behind him, silence filled the practice room again. Namjoon glanced toward the hallway before looking at Jimin carefully. "He cried, didn't he?" Jimin's throat tightened. After a long pause, he nodded once. Namjoon looked down quietly. "I figured." Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Namjoon exhaled heavily and ran a hand through his hair. "He's been trying so hard lately," he said softly. "Too hard." Looked toward the bathroom door. "I know," studied him carefully. "And you? What about me? You look exhausted too." Almost laughed at that, because he didn't know how to explain the storm currently destroying his chest, the fear, the affection, the unbearable tenderness he felt every time Jungkook looked vulnerable around him. Last night had changed something. He just didn't know what came after. Before Jimin could answer, the bathroom door opened again. Jungkook stepped out wearing a black hoodie with damp hair falling over his eyes. Somehow he looked softer now, less shattered than last night. But the sadness was still there. Jimin could still see it. And maybe that was the problem. Because once you truly see someone's pain, you can never unsee it again. Jungkook glanced between the two of them suspiciously. "Why do I feel like you talked about me?" Namjoon immediately grabbed the coffees. "Because we absolutely did." Jungkook groaned softly while Jimin laughed for the first time that morning. A real laugh, warm and uncontrollable. Jungkook turned toward him at the sound instantly. And for one quiet second, he simply stared. The softness in his gaze returned again, dangerous, honest, enough to make Jimin's heartbeat lose rhythm all over again. Then Jungkook smiled too. Small at first, then brighter. And somehow, beneath the gray skis and endless pressure waiting outside that room, Jimin realized there was nothing more terrifying than wanting to protect someone this much.
The movie ended nearly 40 minutes ago, but neither of them had noticed. The television still played softly in the background, flickering pale blue light across the dark living room, while the dorm slowly fell asleep around them. The city outside glittered beyond the windows like scattered stars trapped beneath rain clouds. Jungkook sat on the floor with his back against the couch, knees drawn up slightly, one arm resting lazily across the cushions above his head. Jimin sat beside him. Close enough that their shoulders touched every few seconds. Neither moved away anymore. At some point during the night, the tension between them had shifted into something quieter, more dangerous in its softness, the kind of closeness that no longer needed excuses. Jungkook stared blankly at the television screen before suddenly speaking. "I used to think if I worked harder, eventually I'd stop feeling scared." Looked at him immediately. The younger man kept his eyes forward. "More people loved me," Jungkook smiled faintly without humor. "The more terrified I became of disappointing them." Honesty in his voice felt raw now, stripped clean of performance or pride. Jimin understood why it was past midnight, and people told the truth more easily in the dark. "You don't disappoint people," Jimin said quietly. "I disappoint myself." Answer came too fast, like he had repeated it silently 1,000 times before. Jimin's chest ached. "You're too hard on yourself." Jungkook laughed softly. "You sound like Namjoon Hyung. You say that like it's an insult." "No," Jungkook murmured. "It's comforting." The room fell silent again. Rain finally began tapping gently against the windows once more, soft enough to sound almost peaceful. Jimin leaned back against the couch cushions and studied Jungkook quietly. There were moments when the younger man looked untouchable, on stage, under lights, surrounded by screaming fans, but tonight wasn't one of those moments. Tonight Jungkook looked heartbreakingly human. Tired eyes, messy hair, bare emotions hidden beneath exhausted smiles. And somehow Jimin had never wanted to hold someone closer in his life. The realization scared him because it was becoming impossible to pretend anymore. "You know what I envy about you?" Jungkook asked suddenly. Jimin blinked. "Me, you always know how to comfort people." Smiled weakly. "Not always, you do with me." Younger man finally turned toward him then. And the look in his eyes nearly unraveled Jimin completely. Too warm, too honest, too full of something neither of them had the courage to name out loud yet. "You make me feel." Jungkook hesitated. Jimin's heartbeat quickened. "What? Safe?" The word landed softly between them, but its impact was devastating. Jimin forgot how to breathe for a second. Jungkook looked embarrassed immediately afterward, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. That sounded cheesy. "No," Jimin whispered before he could stop himself. It didn't. Silence, only the rain remained. Jungkook stared at him quietly now, eyes reflecting dim television light. His expression slowly softened into something vulnerable again. I mean it, he admitted. When I'm with you, things feel quieter in my head. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. Nobody had ever trusted him with something that fragile before, and suddenly he understood the real reason Jungkook affected him so deeply. It wasn't because Jungkook was beautiful, or talented, or adored by millions. It was because Jungkook trusted him with the parts of himself nobody else saw, the fear, the loneliness, the exhaustion, and Jimin was helpless against that kind of trust. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly across the city. Inside the living room, Jungkook shifted slightly closer without seeming to realize it, or maybe he did realize. Maybe neither of them wanted to stop anymore. Jimin looked down briefly. Their hands rested only inches apart on the couch cushion, too close, dangerously close. His pulse quickened immediately, then Jungkook's fingers moved first, not fully, just slightly, enough for their knuckles to brush. The contact was accidental for exactly 1 second. After that, neither pulled away. Jimin's heartbeat became unbearable. Jungkook looked down too now, at their hands, at the tiny point of contact that suddenly felt more intimate than anything else tonight. The room seemed impossibly quiet. Then Jungkook whispered softly, "Can I tell you something selfish?" Jimin forced himself to answer calmly. "You already asked me that earlier." A faint smile touched Jungkook's lips. "Yeah, but this one's worse." Jimin's chest tightened. "What is it?" The younger man inhaled slowly before speaking. "I think I've been needing you more than I should." Everything inside Jimin stopped. The rain outside blurred into distant noise. Jungkook looked terrified after saying it, like he regretted the honesty immediately. But Jimin felt his own carefully built walls collapsing all at once. Because the truth was, he felt exactly the same, maybe worse. For years they had danced around this invisible line between friendship and something deeper, hiding behind jokes and affection and lingering glances nobody questioned because they were them. But tonight felt different. Too many truths had already escaped. Jimin looked at Jungkook carefully. The younger man seemed so exposed now, emotions flickering openly across his face. Fear mixed with hope in ways that made Jimin's chest ache unbearably. "You're not the only one," Jimin admitted quietly. Jungkook froze. "What?" Jimin swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at him to stop talking, to protect what they still had, but it was too late now, because the truth had already reached his eyes long before words caught up. "You're hurting," Jimin whispered. "I feel like I can't breathe properly until I know you're okay." Stared at him in complete silence. "And when you smile," Jimin laughed shakily at himself. "It honestly feels like my whole day changes." Younger man's expression softened so suddenly it almost hurt to witness. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then quietly, carefully, Jungkook reached for his hand, this time intentionally, warm fingers slipping slowly between Jimin's. Jimin's breath caught instantly. The touch wasn't dramatic, wasn't rushed, but it felt devastatingly intimate anyway. Jungkook held his hand gently like something precious, like something he had wanted to do for a very long time. Jimin looked down at their intertwined fingers, heart shaking violently inside his chest. Then he heard Jungkook whisper, "I don't know what this is supposed to mean." Looked back up. The vulnerability in Jungkook's eyes nearly destroyed him. Neither of them had experience with feelings this terrifyingly real. Not with each other, not like this. But Jimin knew one thing with painful certainty. He didn't want Jungkook to feel alone anymore. So instead of pulling away, he tightened his grip softly, and Jungkook's breathing visibly faltered. The television continued flickering forgotten light across the room. Rain tapped steadily against the glass. Somewhere down the hallway, a door quietly closed as another member finally went to sleep. But in the dim living room, time seemed to slow around them completely. Jungkook stared at their hands for a long moment before laughing softly under his breath. "What? I'm suddenly really nervous." Jimin smiled faintly. "You, nervous? Don't make fun of me." "Not, you are a little." Jimin's smile widened slightly. And the moment Jungkook saw it, his entire expression softened in a way that made Jimin's chest ache all over again. There was so much affection in Jungkook's gaze now that it almost felt impossible to survive it. Then quietly, barely above the sound of rain, Jungkook whispered, "I think you're becoming the most important person in my life." Felt his heart completely surrender at those words, not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly and irreversibly. And for the first time that night, he stopped trying to fight it. Jimin barely slept, even after they finally left the living room sometime near dawn. Even after Jungkook reluctantly let go of his hand outside his bedroom door, even after the dawn became completely silent, Jimin's mind refused to rest, because everything had changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The warmth of Jungkook's fingers still lingered against his skin like a memory his body refused to release. "I think you're becoming the most important person in my life." Words replayed endlessly in his chest, and the terrifying part was that Jimin felt the same way. Sunlight filtered softly through the curtains hours later, pale gold spreading across the floor as the city slowly awakened again. Jimin sat at the edge of his bed staring blankly at his phone, exhausted thoughts tangled hopelessly together. He should have been scared, maybe he was, but beneath the fear was something gentler, relief. Years of hidden feelings had finally started breathing outside the cage he built around them. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Before Jimin could answer, the door opened slightly. Jungkook peeked inside. His hair was messy from sleep, oversized black hoodie hanging loosely off his frame, eyes still heavy with exhaustion. And somehow he looked even more dangerous like this. Soft, comfortable, real. The moment their eyes met, something warm passed silently between them again. Neither knew how to act normal anymore. Morning, Jungkook murmured. Jimin's heartbeat instantly became a problem. Morning. Jungkook hesitated near the doorway, then quietly asked, "Can I come in?" The simple question shouldn't have affected Jimin this much, but it did. He nodded once. Jungkook entered slowly before sitting beside him on the bed, close enough for their shoulders to brush immediately. Neither mentioned it. Outside, distant traffic drifted through the windows alongside the faint smell of rain left behind from the night before. For a while they simply sat there in silence, comfortable silence, the kind built from years of understanding each other without needing words. Then Jungkook spoke softly. "I kept thinking about last night." Looked down at his hands instantly. "Me too." A small laugh escaped Jungkook under his breath. "Nervous this time. That makes me feel slightly better." Smiled faintly despite himself, but the warmth didn't last long, because uncertainty slowly returned to Jungkook's expression. "What are we supposed to do now?" he asked quietly. There it was, the question both of them had been avoiding. Jimin's chest tightened, because honestly he didn't know. Their lives weren't simple. Nothing about this was simple. They were constantly watched, filmed, observed by millions of people who analyzed every glance, every touch, every emotion. And yet despite all that fear, Jimin couldn't bring himself to regret last night, not even slightly. "I don't know," he admitted truthfully. Jungkook nodded slowly, eyes lowering. For the first time since entering the room he looked scared again, not of Jimin, of losing whatever this was becoming. "I don't want things to get weird between us," he whispered. Jimin answered immediately. "They won't." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can." Looked up. The certainty in Jimin's voice surprised even himself. Because some things he knew without doubt. No matter how confusing this became, he would never willingly hurt Jungkook. "Still me," Jimin said softly. "And you're still you." Stared at him quietly, then smiled, small, relieved. "You always know exactly what to say. That's because you panic too fast." "I do not panic. You absolutely do." Jungkook laughed quietly, shoulders relaxing again, and just hearing that sound made Jimin feel lighter. God, he was already hopeless. Vibrations suddenly interrupted the moment. Jungkook glanced at his phone and groaned dramatically. "Have a meeting in an hour." Reality crashed back immediately. Schedules, staff, managers, public appearances, the outside world waiting for them again. Jimin watched Jungkook's expression shift subtly the moment responsibility returned. Not fully closing off, but enough for Jimin to notice the emotional armor sliding back into place. That hurt more than expected. Jungkook noticed his expression instantly. "What? Nothing." You made the sad face. "I do not have a sad face." "You literally do." Jimin rolled his eyes while Jungkook grinned softly. Then unexpectedly, the younger man reached out and fixed a strand of Jimin's messy hair near his forehead. The touch lasted barely 2 seconds, but both of them froze afterward anyway. The intimacy of it settled heavily between them. Jungkook's fingers lingered slightly before pulling back. His voice became quieter. "You're really pretty, you know that." Jimin, brain completely stopped functioning. "What?" Jungkook immediately looked embarrassed after saying it aloud. He laughed awkwardly. "Sorry, that just came out." Stared at him speechlessly while his entire face burned. Jungkook looked equally flustered now, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "This is exactly what I meant about things getting weird." Himself, Jimin burst into laughter, real laughter, the kind that made his shoulders shake. Jungkook looked offended immediately. "You're laughing at me. You just randomly called me pretty like you were in a romance movie. That's not funny. It's a little funny." Jungkook groaned dramatically before hiding his face behind one hand while Jimin continued laughing softly beside him. And somehow, for the first time in days, the heaviness inside Jungkook seemed lighter too. Jimin noticed it immediately. The tension in his shoulders had eased. His eyes looked warmer, more alive. Maybe honesty really was healing him slowly. Then Jungkook lowered his hand again and looked at Jimin quietly. The laughter faded naturally between them, and suddenly the air changed once more, softer now, more vulnerable. "You know," Jungkook said carefully, "last night scared me." Jimin's smile faded slightly. "Because of us." Jungkook nodded once, but not in a bad way. The confession tightened something deep inside Jimin's chest. Jungkook looked down briefly before continuing. "I think I've wanted to say those things for a long time." The room fell silent again. Jimin's heartbeat became unbearably loud. "Why did you?" Jungkook laughed softly without humor. "Because I was scared you wouldn't feel the same." Looked at him quietly. Then slowly, carefully, he reached for Jungkook's hand first this time. The younger man immediately went still. Jimin intertwined their fingers gently. Warmth spread instantly through both of them. "You idiot," Jimin whispered fondly. Jungkook looked up, and the softness in Jimin's expression nearly took his breath away. "I've been scared of the exact same thing." For several seconds, Jungkook simply stared at him, then something fragile and beautiful broke open in his smile, not teasing, not playful. Just deeply, overwhelmingly happy. Jimin felt his chest ache at the sight. because maybe this was what they had both been searching for without realizing it, not answers, not labels, just someone who understood the loneliness underneath everything else. Outside the bedroom window, sunlight finally broke through the clouds completely, filling the room with soft gold. Jungkook squeezed Jimin's hand gently, then quieter than before he whispered, "I don't feel lonely when I'm with you anymore." Jimin realized in that moment that no confession in the world could have meant more to him than that.